difficult in it.
Why are you always doing this? You know I can't stand it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The morning sun poured softly through the curtains, brushing against the edge of my coffee cup as I sat in silence, scrolling through the photos he'd sent. The smiling faces, the ocean behind them, the captions full of family time and memories made. It was supposed to be our family trip. I was supposed to be there. But somewhere between the promises and the planning, I was left behind with excuses that didn't quite add up. At first, I believed it was just business, something urgent, something temporary. But when the calls stopped coming and the credit card alerts started flashing numbers I didn't recognize, a different story began to unfold. A story where trust had a price tag and loyalty came with hidden receipts. That $100,000 wasn't just money, it was the cost of pretending everything was fine. It was the moment I realized that every lie he told had been carefully rehearsed, every detail crafted to keep me blind. But truth has a strange way of revealing itself, even through the smallest cracks in a perfect life. It began like any other week, with him packing hurriedly and assuring me that everything was set for our next time. He said it with that same practiced calm, the one that always convinced me not to ask too many questions. The family trip had been planned for months, but suddenly there were schedule conflicts, business emergencies, and a long list of reasons why I should stay home. He promised it was just logistics, that he'd handle everything, that I could join later. I wanted to believe him because believing was easier than confronting the quiet doubt creeping into my chest. The first few days passed with his usual updates, pictures sent through messages, short videos of beaches, dinners, and laughter. Our children looked happy, carefree, surrounded by cousins and family friends. It seemed perfect, except for one small detail. Something in the photos felt off. A missing person here, an extra face there, and sometimes the background didn't match the place he said they were staying. It was subtle at first, the kind of inconsistency that most people would overlook. But the more I looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. I started paying attention to timestamps. The photos were sent hours apart, sometimes during times he claimed to be asleep. In one, a sunset glowed behind them, even though the message arrived well past midnight in that time zone. The laughter on his face looked rehearsed, forced, like a performance meant to sell a story. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe stress was making me paranoid, but the unease wouldn't leave. It wasn't until a friend casually mentioned seeing a social media post from someone else on that same trip that everything began to unravel. The post was tagged in a completely different location, with unfamiliar names, unfamiliar faces. And yet, there was my husband, smiling in the background, looking far too comfortable. The caption didn't mention a family trip. It spoke of business partners, networking, and celebrating success. My stomach dropped. I stared at the photo for minutes, my heart racing as if I'd been running. That was the moment I realized something wasn't just off. It was deliberate. I spent the next few hours going through receipts, flight confirmations, and credit card charges. Every line told a story he never intended for me to read. There were luxury resort bookings under false names, private dinners, expensive gifts, and transactions in cities he never told me he was visiting. The amount grew with every discovery, eventually crossing a number that made me feel both sick and betrayed. $100,000 gone, siphoned into lies wrapped in luxury. The shock was like a wave, cold, powerful, and disorienting. I couldn't understand how someone could plan something so carefully, so convincingly, while looking me in the eye every day as if everything was fine. The house suddenly felt different, quieter, as though the walls themselves knew something I didn't. Every memory replayed itself in my head, the moments I trusted him, defended him, believed his excuses, when friends warned me to look closer. I started tracing his movements. Not out of revenge, but out of a need to understand how long I'd been living in a story that wasn't mine. I found old emails, deleted messages, and call logs that painted a picture of a man living two lives. There were confirmations for reservations, private jets, spa packages, even gifts marked with initials that weren't mine. It wasn't a family trip, it was an escape, a calculated illusion meant to maintain control over what I saw and what I believed. The realization cut deeper than the money ever could. It wasn't just about deceit. It was about how easily trust can be manipulated when you love someone enough to silence your intuition. I remembered how, before the trip, he'd been overly affectionate, offering small gifts and gestures to distract me from the inconsistencies in his schedule. I thought it was love. Now I understood it was guilt disguised as romance. As I sat there, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, the truth became impossible to ignore. The photos weren't memories, they were props. The texts weren't affection, they were scripts. Every "I miss you" was a carefully timed line in a performance meant to keep me quiet and unquestioning. What he underestimated, though, was that lies, no matter how well crafted, always leave fingerprints. And those fingerprints led me straight to the truth he thought I'd never find. That night, I couldn't sleep. The images replayed over and over in my mind, every frame another reminder of the person I thought I knew, and the life I thought I had. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir. An awareness, a quiet strength that whispered I had been blind for too long. For the first time, instead of feeling broken, I began to feel awake. The truth behind the fake family trip had already shaken me, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The financial betrayal that lay hidden beneath every lie. It started as small discrepancies, things I might have ignored before, an unfamiliar transaction here, a strange hotel charge there. But once I began digging, the numbers no longer looked random. They formed a pattern, one that revealed just how deep his deception really ran. Each receipt, each statement, was a breadcrumb leading me toward the reality that the trip wasn't only emotional betrayal. It was a calculated financial theft. I remember sitting at the dining table late one night, surrounded by open bank statements and glowing screens. My fingers trembled as I compared records, line by line. There were charges from luxury resorts I'd never heard of, private car services, designer boutiques, and restaurant bills that could have covered a month's rent. My heart sank as I added up the totals. Every transaction told a story of indulgence, of someone living a life I didn't even know existed. The deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't impulsive spending. It was organized, planned, and executed with precision. He had moved money between accounts, hidden transfers under business labels, and even withdrawn large sums of cash days before the supposed family trip. It was like peeling back the layers of a lie that had been years in the making. I saw payments to travel agencies, private villas, and event coordinators, all under the guise of family expenses. But when I called the agencies pretending to confirm the bookings, the responses chilled me. They weren't family reservations, they were listed under corporate retreats, with guest lists that didn't include me or our children. The amount, $100,000, wasn't just a number anymore. It was the price tag of my trust. It represented years of shared dreams, savings, and sacrifices that he had turned into his personal playground. He had spent our future on false appearances, using our money to live a double life while I stayed home, believing in his promises. The realization made my chest tighten. The betrayal wasn't only emotional, it was financial, psychological, and deeply personal. I couldn't understand how he'd done it so easily. How someone could look me in the eye, talk about budgets, make plans for renovations, for investments, while knowing he had already drained our accounts. He'd even spoken about setting aside money for our children's education, for the family's security, while secretly funneling it elsewhere. I remembered the way he dismissed my questions about sudden business expenses, telling me I didn't need to worry, that he had everything under control. In truth, he was controlling the narrative, ensuring I stayed ignorant while he built an illusion of success. When I confronted the financial institution to verify some transactions, they confirmed my worst fear. Joint funds had been moved without my authorization, disguised as shared withdrawals. My name had been used, my signature forged digitally in some cases. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate. He had orchestrated everything so smoothly that no one questioned it. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with impulsive behavior. I was dealing with manipulation disguised as financial management. The emotional toll was unbearable. Every document I uncovered felt like a new betrayal, a silent confession written in numbers. It was more than losing money. It was losing a sense of safety. Money we had saved for our home, our future, our children's dreams. It was all gone. I had been living beside a stranger who had learned how to weaponize trust, and the cruelest part was how normal everything had seemed while it was happening. He laughed with me, kissed me goodbye, texted me from the airport, all while knowing he was draining our life savings behind my back. I remember staring at the final total in disbelief. $100,000. It echoed in my mind like a cruel reminder of how expensive blind faith can be. The money could have bought so much, a new chapter, a business, a safety net. Instead, it became the cost of my silence and his lies. That realization broke something in me but also lit a fire I didn't know I had. For the first time, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. Furious at how easily I had trusted, how long I had ignored the red flags, how deeply I had believed that love meant never questioning. I printed every record, saved every receipt, and organized every detail into a folder. It wasn't just proof, it was my awakening. As I flipped through the pages, I saw the story of our marriage rewritten in financial terms. Each transaction a reminder of how much I'd lost, but also how much I was about to reclaim. Because what he didn't realize was that betrayal doesn't end with destruction. Sometimes it becomes the foundation of freedom. But at that moment, sitting alone in the quiet, I only knew one thing for sure. The man I thought I knew had turned our shared life into his personal con, and the woman I used to be was gone forever. When the full truth of his deception surfaced, the emotional shock didn't hit all at once. It arrived in waves, unpredictable and cruel. Some moments I felt numb, detached from everything around me, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. Other moments I could feel the anger rise in my chest so fiercely it made my hands tremble. The betrayal wasn't only about the money or the lies. It was about the humiliation that came with realizing how completely I had been fooled, not just in private but in front of everyone who thought they knew us. Friends had admired our life together, the picture-perfect marriage, the glamorous trips, the smiles we displayed at gatherings. Now I couldn't even step outside without feeling the weight of invisible eyes on me, wondering if people knew. That kind of humiliation cuts deep. It makes you question not only your partner but also your own judgment. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have stood beside him, defending him, while he built an entire world out of deceit? I remember the first time someone mentioned the trip after everything came out. A family friend asked how it went, saying how wonderful the photos looked, how happy everyone seemed. My throat tightened, my lips curved into a forced smile, and I muttered something vague about being busy. Inside, I was breaking. The idea that people still believed his version of the story made me feel small, powerless. He had not only lied to me, he had crafted a lie convincing enough for everyone else to believe too. At night, the silence of the house felt unbearable. Every corner reminded me of the life we built together, now tainted by dishonesty. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly. My mind replayed every conversation, every detail, searching for moments that should have revealed the truth sooner. I remembered the times he dodged questions with charm, the way he brushed off my concerns, how he used affection to distract me from my intuition. The manipulation had been so subtle, so consistent, that I began to doubt my own reality. The emotional weight of the betrayal was unlike anything I had experienced. It wasn't just sadness, it was grief. I was mourning the loss of someone who was still alive, but no longer the person I thought he was. I cried not because I missed him, but because I missed the version of myself who believed in love without conditions. There was an innocence in that trust that I knew would never return. And then came the public side of the humiliation. Rumors spread quietly but quickly, friends whispering, extended family pretending not to pry while their eyes said everything. People speculated about the money, about what really happened on that family trip. Some pitied me, others judged me, assuming I must have known and chosen to ignore it. That was the cruelest part of all, being portrayed as either blind or complicit. I wanted to scream the truth, to expose everything, but I also wanted to preserve what little dignity I had left. I started to isolate myself, not out of fear, but because the world felt too heavy to face. The phone calls from concerned relatives, the messages asking if I was okay became unbearable. I wasn't okay. I was shattered in ways words couldn't express. The emotional storm was constant, anger 1 minute, heartbreak the next, then a strange calm that felt almost like surrender. I would sit by the window at night, staring into the darkness, wondering how long he had planned it all, wondering if any of it had ever been real. But beneath the pain something else began to stir, a quiet clarity. I realized that humiliation, as painful as it was, had stripped away the illusion I'd been living under. For the first time, I saw things for what they truly were. The mask he wore had fallen off completely, and what remained wasn't love, it was control, deceit, and selfishness. The emotional pain became a mirror, forcing me to confront not just his actions but my own willingness to look away when the truth was too uncomfortable to face. There were moments when I thought I would never recover from the humiliation, that I would forever be the woman who got lied to, who lost everything. But the more I sat with the pain, the more I began to understand it wasn't shameful to be betrayed. It was shameful for the one who betrayed. I had loved honestly, trusted fully, and stood by him with good intentions. The humiliation I felt wasn't mine to carry, it was his, disguised and projected onto me. Every tear, every sleepless night, every whisper behind my back became part of a transformation I didn't see coming. The pain was deep, yes, but it also carved out space for something new to grow, a version of myself that no longer needed validation, no longer craved approval, no longer confused love with loyalty. I was still hurting, but I was no longer blind. And though the humiliation burned, it also revealed the truth in the most brutal, undeniable way. The day I decided to confront the lies was the day everything shifted inside me. For weeks I had lived in silence, surrounded by receipts, screenshots, and unanswered questions, watching the image of the man I once loved crumble piece by piece. At first, I thought I needed to wait for the right moment, a time when my emotions weren't so raw, when I could speak without shaking. But the truth is, there's never a perfect moment to face betrayal. There's only a breaking point. And mine came quietly, on a morning that looked like any other. He walked through the door with that same composed smile, carrying the confidence of someone who believed he was still in control. He had no idea I had spent nights tracing every dollar, every lie, every step of his fake trip. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. But this time, I wasn't the woman who questioned softly or avoided confrontation. I was calm, deliberate, and ready. I told him to sit down. The tone of my voice must have startled him because for the first time he hesitated before speaking. I laid the documents on the table, bank statements, screenshots of messages, photos that contradicted his story. For a long moment there was silence. His eyes darted across the pages, and I saw it. The flicker of fear, the realization that his carefully built story had finally collapsed. He tried to speak, to explain, to twist the truth the way he always did, but I didn't let him. I had spent years listening, doubting myself, allowing him to reshape reality, until I couldn't tell what was true anymore. This time, I wasn't listening for excuses. I was watching the truth unravel in his eyes. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he had to make certain business decisions, that the money wasn't lost but invested. He even had the nerve to suggest I was overreacting. I could feel the anger rise inside me, but I held it back, refusing to let emotion cloud the moment. I wanted him to see what he had done, to look at the damage in the eyes of the woman he underestimated. I told him I knew everything, that I had contacted the banks, verified the withdrawals, and seen the names attached to the charges. He went pale, his confident posture collapsing as the truth became undeniable. The confrontation wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was cold, precise, and final. I wasn't there to argue or to understand his reasons. I was there to take back my power. The very thing he had taken from me one lie at a time. Every sentence I spoke felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under years of manipulation. For once, I wasn't afraid of his reactions or his anger. I wasn't the woman trying to fix or forgive. I was the woman drawing the line. When I told him about the $100,000, about the deceit, about the photos and the truth behind the so-called family trip, he didn't deny it anymore. He just sat there, quiet, his face blank, like someone caught in a spotlight with nowhere left to hide. There was a strange calm in that silence. It wasn't satisfaction, it was clarity. The person sitting across from me was a stranger, one I no longer owed understanding or patience. He tried to shift the blame. To say I hadn't been supportive enough, that he had done it for us, that I didn't understand the pressures he was under. Those words might have worked once. They might have made me feel guilty or uncertain, but not anymore. I looked him in the eyes and told him that love built on lies isn't love at all. I told him he had stolen not only money but years of peace, trust and truth. For a moment, I saw something in his face, maybe regret, maybe fear, but it was too late for either to matter. When he realized I wasn't breaking, that I wasn't crying or begging, his tone changed. He became defensive, angry even, accusing me of invading his privacy, of overreacting. It was absurd, almost laughable how quickly he tried to rewrite the story even in the face of undeniable evidence. But this time, his words didn't reach me. I had learned that manipulation thrives on reaction, and I gave him none. I simply stood, told him it was over, and walked away. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the weight of freedom pressing against my chest. For so long I had felt trapped, by love, by loyalty, by the illusion that holding on made me strong. But in that moment, I understood that strength isn't in staying. It's in leaving, in standing tall even when your heart is breaking. I didn't know what would come next, how I would rebuild, or what life would look like after this. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had faced the truth, spoken it aloud, and reclaimed the part of myself that refused to live in lies any longer. After the confrontation, the silence that followed was heavy but strangely liberating. For the first time in years, there was no pretending, no forced smiles, no carefully constructed illusions holding my world together. Everything had collapsed, and yet, beneath the wreckage, I could feel something powerful beginning to stir. A realization that losing everything might just be the start of finding myself again. Turning that loss into a moment of strength didn't happen overnight. It began quietly, with small decisions, with choosing to face reality instead of hiding from it. The first thing I did was take control of what was left. I called the banks, froze the accounts, and went through every financial record again. Not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming what was hers. The act of organizing my finances became more than damage control. It was therapy. Each form I filled, each phone call I made, each password I changed, felt like taking another step away from the chaos he had left behind. I learned things I had never paid attention to before: investment terms, property rights, account management. For years I had trusted him to handle it all. Now, I was learning that independence wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. The fear of starting over was real. I remember lying awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd rebuild a life from the ruins of deceit. The future felt uncertain, but the more I faced it, the less it scared me. I realized that everything I thought I needed, his validation, his stability, his so-called protection, was an illusion. I had been capable all along. I had just forgotten that strength doesn't need permission. I started with what I had left, my skills, my ideas, and the determination to never depend on anyone for security again. Turning the loss into power required confronting not only what he did, but why I allowed it to continue for so long. I began journaling, writing every thought that came to mind. I didn't do it to dwell on the past, but to understand it. To see how I had silenced my intuition to keep the peace, how I had confused comfort with safety. Each entry became a mirror, showing me the parts of myself I had neglected while trying to keep a crumbling relationship intact. The more I wrote, the lighter I felt. There was pain in revisiting those memories, but there was also clarity. Eventually, I decided to take a bold step and start something new. A business idea I had once mentioned but never pursued because he said it was too risky. It started small, almost fragile, but it was mine. I poured my energy into it, not just for income but as a symbol of freedom. Every small success reminded me that I didn't need anyone's approval to build something meaningful. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was never the helpless person he made me believe I was. Friends who once pitied me began to notice the change. I wasn't the broken woman they expected to see. I spoke differently, moved differently. I had stopped trying to justify what happened and started using it as motivation. I read books about rebuilding after betrayal, watched others share their stories online, and slowly realized that pain doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. There's a power that comes from surviving something that was meant to destroy you, and once you feel it, nothing can shake you again. Even the memory of losing $100,000 began to shift in my mind. What once felt like the ultimate failure started to look like an expensive lesson. That money was gone, yes, but it had bought me something far more valuable, the truth. It had exposed the reality I refused to see and forced me to stand on my own. It was the price of my awakening, and as painful as it was, I began to see it as an investment in the person I was becoming. I learned to celebrate small victories. The day I made my first business profit. The day I woke up without that heavy ache in my chest. The day I looked in the mirror and didn't see a woman defined by betrayal but by resilience. I started traveling again, this time on my own terms, to places I had always wanted to see but never did because he didn't approve. Each trip became a declaration of independence, a reminder that freedom isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. People often talk about empowerment like it's a moment of triumph, but for me, it was built quietly, piece by piece, through choices that no one saw. It was waking up every day and deciding to move forward, even when it hurt. It was learning to trust myself again, to make decisions without fear, to take risks because I believed in my ability to survive them. Losing him and that money had stripped my life bare, but in doing so, it revealed something I had forgotten existed. A woman who was capable, unbreakable, and finally, free. Freedom didn't arrive as a sudden burst of happiness. It came slowly, like the sunrise after a long, sleepless night. At first, I didn't recognize it. It showed up in small ways, in the quiet mornings when I made coffee without anxiety, in the peace of knowing I didn't have to explain myself to anyone, in the steady rhythm of building something that was mine alone. The chaos he left behind had once felt unbearable, but as I stepped further away from it, I began to see it for what it really was. A blessing in disguise. What I thought was the end had actually been the beginning of a life I never imagined I could have. I started investing my time, not in chasing what was lost, but in creating what was next. The business I had started in the aftermath of betrayal began to grow faster than I expected. I worked long hours, but this time it didn't feel like a burden, it felt like purpose. Every deal I closed, every milestone I hit, became a reminder that I was no longer dependent on anyone else's decisions. My work wasn't about survival anymore. It was about freedom, about building a future that couldn't be taken away from me. The luxury came later, almost accidentally. As the business expanded, so did my confidence. I learned how to negotiate, how to invest wisely, how to manage what I earned. Opportunities began to appear. Partnerships, invitations, recognition. I moved into a new place, not grand at first, but peaceful and entirely mine. It felt different waking up in a home that didn't hold secrets or lies. The silence there was comforting, a sound of truth instead of tension. As time went on, I upgraded to something bigger, something that reflected how far I'd come, a place filled with light, open space, and quiet elegance, the kind of life I once thought only existed for people like him, those who took shortcuts and hid behind charm. But this was different. This wasn't bought with deception. It was earned with perseverance and courage. Every corner of that home represented a part of my journey, the late nights of self-doubt, the mornings of determination, the endless effort to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. The luxury I built for myself wasn't just material, it was emotional. I could finally breathe without second-guessing every word or glance. I could travel where I wanted, make choices without permission, and surround myself with people who added peace instead of chaos. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized that independence wasn't about being alone, it was about being complete. I learned to enjoy solitude, to savor quiet dinners overlooking the city skyline, to take pride in every small victory I achieved on my own terms. People who once saw me as fragile began to see a different woman. Strong, composed, radiant. The same friends who had pitied me now looked at me with admiration. They asked how I managed to recover, how I turned something so painful into something so powerful. I never had a perfect answer. It wasn't a single moment or decision. It was a series of small acts of courage, of refusing to stay broken when everything around me said I should be. There were still days when the past tried to creep in, moments when I'd remember the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. But instead of feeling bitterness, I began to feel gratitude. Every scar, every sleepless night, every tear had pushed me closer to the life I was living now. The woman who once cried over a broken promise now smiled at her reflection, knowing she had built a life that no one could take from her again. My luxury wasn't about designer labels or expensive vacations, it was about freedom from fear. It was the luxury of peace, of self-respect, of waking up with clarity and sleeping without doubt. It was the luxury of knowing that everything I had was real, because I earned it myself. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone. The world that once felt so small and suffocating now felt open and limitless. Sometimes, I'd stand on the balcony of my new home, watching the city lights shimmer below. The same city that once witnessed my heartbreak was now witnessing my rebirth. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed lies because she wanted to believe in love, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace. She had to break so I could become who I was meant to be. The $100,000 that once symbolized betrayal had become irrelevant compared to the wealth of peace and purpose I now held. Losing that money had forced me to confront the truth, but it also led me to something priceless: freedom. And that freedom had become my foundation, my compass, and the definition of true luxury. I had turned the pain into power, the loss into lessons, and the ending into a beginning more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. In the end, what began as a story of betrayal became a journey of awakening. Losing $100,000 and the man I thought I knew was painful, but it stripped away every illusion I once clung to. I discovered that freedom isn't given, it's claimed, built from the courage to face the truth and walk away from what no longer serves you. The lies that once broke me became the fuel that rebuilt me into someone stronger, wiser, and unshakably independent. I learned that luxury isn't measured in money or possessions, but in peace of mind, self-respect, and the ability to stand alone without fear. What I thought was the end of everything became the beginning of a life filled with clarity, confidence, and control. Losing him was my greatest heartbreak, but finding myself was the richest victory I could ever have earned.